Year 1914. A small island where there is no city and no crowd of humans. Only a lighthouse and a mystery hidden in the depths of the ocean. The film begins by showing a ship moving towards its destination via the South Atlantic Ocean. On that ship was a weather officer, David. They were going towards an island that was hidden in the deepest parts of the Atlantic Ocean. The government had sent David there so that he could observe the changing weather of that island. David had to stay there for approximately 1 year to collect data, to understand the strange changes in the weather, and then return. The captain was taking David to that island on his ship. Along with him was 1 year's worth of food and all necessary supplies. After a long journey, they finally reached the island. They landed on the island with the help of a boat. On the island was a lighthouse and a small house where David was to live. Because before this, a weather officer also used to live here. But now his duty time was over. From today, David became the new weather officer of this island. And the old officer Robert was now going to return home on Captain Axel's ship. But upon entering that house, they were surprised. There was no trace of any human. Inside the room, furniture was scattered. Everything was upside down. Perhaps someone could be in the lighthouse. The captain and David moved towards the lighthouse without wasting time. And there they saw a strange sight. The entire lighthouse was surrounded by sharp and pointed logs, as if someone had deliberately closed it, so that no one could go inside. The captain and David knocked on the lighthouse gate many times, but no response was received. Finally, they pushed the gate forcefully and entered. Right at the top of the lighthouse, they found a man, whose name was Gruner. He was lying down. When they asked Gruner about the old weather officer, he replied quite carelessly, "He is dead. He had some terrible illness." Hearing Gruner's words, both David and the captain were shocked. They felt that perhaps Gruner's mental condition was not good. The captain told David, "If you want, you can return with us now." But David knew that if he could give the government an accurate weather report of this island, he could get a lot of money. And he needed money anyway. So he decided that he would stay here. The captain gave him a gun. For protection. Perhaps this place is not as safe as it looks. The next morning, David started his work. But as soon as he reached near the ocean, his steps stopped. Between the rocks, some stones were arranged strangely, and some seashells were also placed among them. In a strange pattern, David thought perhaps Gruner had done all this. Thinking this, he again got busy with his work. Collecting weather data, the same work for which he had come here. During work, when he looked towards the lighthouse with binoculars, he saw another person with Gruner. But then he thought perhaps it was his illusion. Night had fallen and David was busy with his work. Just then there was a knock at the door. He thought perhaps it was Gruner. David called his name, but no response was received. Holding a lamp, as David moved forward, some strange sounds echoed in his ears. And then he saw a hand of some strange creature trying to come inside from under the gate. That hand was not human. David's heart was filled with terror. He immediately ran towards the basement and hid there. In a short while, that mysterious creature had entered the house. It was secretly searching for David. From a small crack in the basement, that creature's terrifying eyes stared at David. David picked up a knife, and as those eyes came in front of that crack, he plunged the knife with all his might. That creature shrieked and ran away, but it could come back any time. David firmly closed the basement gate, tied it tightly with a rope, and spent the whole night awake there, in the shadow of terror. The next morning when David went out of the house, he saw some marks on the sand. The footprints were not human-like. It was absolutely clear. This was not the work of a human. Those marks ended directly towards the ocean. Now David understood everything. Why Gruner had put sharp logs around the lighthouse. Perhaps for that strange creature. And now David knew. This house is not safe for him at all. Perhaps that creature will return again tonight. Out of fear, David runs towards the lighthouse. He shouts at Gruner, "Open the gate. I need to come in." But Gruner does not let him in, and says, "You should have returned with that ship." David returns disappointed. But now he will have to make his house safe. He closed every window of the house with wood, made a barricade of sharp logs all around, and placed old papers and books outside the gate. Then he sprinkled oil on them, so that if that creature comes back, he can scare it away with fire. But there was one thing David did not know yet, and he was going to find out tonight. Fortunately, he found an old box inside the house. In that box, there was a gun and many bullets. Seeing this, he gained a little courage. but fear was still alive. As the sun began to set, the darkness of night spread everywhere. David sat quietly in a corner of the house, holding the gun. His breathing was fast. Just then a strange sound was heard, and when David stepped towards the window, it was as if the ground slipped from under his feet. Not just one, many of those strange creatures were seen rising from the water, and all of them were moving towards his house. In a short while, they started trying to break the gate. David immediately started firing bullets. Some creatures fell, but the others became even more violent. They were now trying to enter the house. As their numbers increased, David, without wasting time, set fire to the papers and old books kept outside the gate. Seeing the fire, those creatures, scared, returned to the ocean. But now that same fire had reached David's house. The house had caught fire. And because the entire house was made of wood, the fire spread like lightning. David immediately wrapped himself in a sheet to save himself, broke the gate and came out, and hid behind a large stone near the lighthouse. His right hand was badly burned. Fortunately, it started raining at that very moment. The fire slowly began to extinguish. But even after a whole night of rain, David could not save his house by morning. The entire house was almost burnt to ashes. Now if David had to stay alive, he would have to take refuge in the lighthouse. He picked up his rifle and hid among the stones near the lighthouse. When Gruner came out of the lighthouse to fill water, David followed him. The intention was to take him at gunpoint and enter the lighthouse. But suddenly, when Gruner aimed his gun at him, a strange creature that was near Gruner attacked him. That creature was Gruner's protector. Gruner immediately stopped David and said, "This is my pet." David did not fire but made a condition. If he wanted to live, he should be allowed to stay in the lighthouse. He had enough gunpowder for a year and enough food for both of them to survive. Gruner was silent for a while, then slowly said yes. Before evening, both of them returned to the lighthouse with the remaining food. David now wanted to know more about Gruner and his pet. Actually, once Gruner had saved her life, she had accidentally got stuck in his fishing net. Then that creature was small, and after that day, she stayed with Gruner, started obeying his every word. But Gruner was an angry person, and he never behaved humanely with that creature. He used to have regular physical relations with her. Once that creature also attacked Gruner, and in return, Gruner punished her. Such a punishment that after that, the creature started considering herself Gruner's maid. Perhaps this is why every night those creatures come out of the ocean, to take her back. But those creatures cannot attack in daylight. Anyway, David does not want to stay here anymore. He wants to send a signal to any incoming ship and leave this place. But this work was not so easy. Gruner said no ship comes to this island. But David does not believe him. He does not like staying here at all now. He feels suffocated here. He wants to leave this place as soon as possible. Evening has begun. Gruner tells him, "Get ready with the gun because those creatures can attack anytime." They get ready to turn on the lighthouse light. And in a short while, a large number of creatures come out of the ocean. They are moving towards the lighthouse. Gruner kept firing at them. But David was completely terrified. He started retreating further inside the lighthouse. Even after Gruner repeatedly told him, he just sat quietly in a corner. And in a short while, David fainted. Gruner fought those creatures alone. The next morning, Gruner angrily woke him up and said, "If you want to stay in the lighthouse, you will have to obey my every word. Bring water daily, do the small and big tasks of the lighthouse, and also stand guard duty with him at night." Whether David wanted to or not, all this had become a compulsion for him. To stay alive, he would have to live in the lighthouse. David was now ready to do all of Gruner's work. But there was one thing he never liked: physically torturing that female creature in different ways every day. But for a person who has been living alone on a deserted island for years, his mental state is bound to deteriorate a bit. David also thinks something similar. Perhaps Gruner's mind is not right now, but he still has to obey him. Night falls. Both again get ready for guard duty. And once again, those creatures come out of the ocean. But today David is not afraid. He fired, but today Gruner does nothing. He leaves David outside and closes the lighthouse gate. And he himself sits quietly inside, so that David can learn for himself how to fight these creatures. Otherwise, he will die fighting. David screams for help, but Gruner does not help him. In this way, fighting, that night passes, and morning comes. In the morning, Gruner saw David sitting outside the lighthouse gate, covered in blood. Now he had learned how to fight these creatures. The fear inside him was gone. In this way, time passed. Fighting those creatures at night and managing Gruner's lighthouse work all day, this island had become like a closed house for him. He constantly kept thinking about when he would leave this place, when he would be free. With time, David developed a strange friendship with that female creature. David now started feeling bad for her. Now he understood how difficult it is to live alone, leaving one's own people. Perhaps that creature also felt something similar. David also gave that creature a name, Anarius. And then one day they saw that the attacks of those creatures were slowly decreasing. David thinks perhaps in winter they go somewhere else, like whales do. Or perhaps they had understood that fighting these two would achieve nothing. But Gruner clearly told him no. They will attack again. Now they are reproducing themselves. Their numbers are increasing. A few more days passed like this. One night after dinner, Gruner and David started playing chess to pass the time. But this is where Gruner made a big mistake. They both got so engrossed in the game that they forgot to turn on the lighthouse lights. And taking advantage of the darkness, the creatures attacked them. David saw that those creatures had now bred. Their numbers were so large that two people together could not fight for long. The gun's bullets were also almost finished. Somehow, escaping, they reached the top of the lighthouse. But meanwhile, Gruner's leg got a deep injury. Those creatures are trying to enter the lighthouse. And David and Gruner see no way to escape from anywhere. They gave up, but fortunately, morning had come. As the sun slowly emerges, those creatures leave the lighthouse and go back into the ocean. Anarius tries to heal Gruner's wound. But by now David had understood that they cannot win this fight with these creatures. Bullets are also now close to finishing. They also do not have enough food to last much longer. Gruner was still treating both David and Anarius badly, but he particularly used to hit Anarius, which David did not like at all. One day David gifted Anarius a small toy boat, which he had made from whale bones. Perhaps this would lighten Anarius's mood a bit. But when Anarius saw that boat, she took David to a corner of the island where there was actually a real boat kept. When David asked Gruner about that boat, he said, yes, he already knew that there was a boat in that part of the island. A few months ago, a common smuggling ship, which was carrying a lot of ammunition, had sunk near this island due to a storm in the ocean. Some people had reached this island alive through the boat, but before morning, none of them survived. All became prey to that creature. Hearing all this, a plan came to David's mind. They had something like a diving suit. If any of them wore that suit and dived into that part of the ocean, it was possible that they might find some bullets or dynamite, which would make fighting those monsters easier. But Gruner flatly refused. He did not even want to go near that ocean. But David was ready to do this work even at the risk of his life. A few more days passed like this. A deep connection started forming between David and Anarius. David started liking her. Gruner secretly saw all this. And at that very moment, for the first time, this thought came to his mind. Perhaps he should help David. But Gruner's real intention was something else. He wanted David to help him bring the dynamite boxes kept under the ocean back to the surface. And after that, leave him alone in the ocean, so that those creatures kill him. In this way, the dynamite would also come to him, and Anarius would again become his slave. Both reached that place. David wore the diving suit and went down into the ocean. The ship was completely destroyed, but luck was good. They found some dynamite boxes. Just then, those creatures suddenly appeared. David got scared and fell. The iron diving suit was so heavy that he could not even move. He could not even send a signal to Gruner above. Gruner thought that perhaps those creatures had killed David. But actually, there were only two small children there. David created pressure underwater and left his diving suit there. He swam to the surface himself. They found some old boxes there which contained dynamite. They laid dynamite in 2 layers around the lighthouse, so that when the next attack happens, they can finish off the monsters in one go. A few months passed and snow started falling. But once again, those creatures disappeared. Attacks had stopped. Now their main work was to operate the lighthouse and stand guard as always. Gruner's patience had now broken. Perhaps Anarius had told those monsters about the dynamite plan. That's why they were not attacking now. Gruner went mad with anger and started beating Anarius. But David stopped him. Finally, both of them together made a new plan to leave the main gate of the lighthouse open. so that as soon as those creatures come near, they are blown up with dynamite. In a short while, those creatures started coming out of the ocean. They went straight towards the main gate, and upon entering, attacked David. David also showed courage and clashed with those monsters. As those creatures reached near the lighthouse, Gruner pressed the dynamite lever. But there was no blast. David had disconnected its connection. He had forgotten to reconnect it. David immediately ran upstairs and started connecting the dynamite wire. Until then, those creatures were trying to climb the lighthouse, whom only Gruner was trying to stop, alone. As soon as the connection was complete, David blew up the first layer. Many creatures were killed in the blast. But still, many monsters were ready to attack the lighthouse. Because of this, Gruner also blasted the second layer. Both fainted in this terrible explosion. The next morning, when both regained consciousness, Anarius was not there. Dead creatures were scattered all around. Gruner was killing all those who were alive but injured. Just then David's eyes fell on a necklace hanging around the neck of one of them. And at that moment, David realized his biggest mistake. The creatures whom they had considered wild until now were also civilized like humans. They just could not speak. Perhaps their attack on the lighthouse was for some reason. But for Gruner, all this was useless talk. For him, he was the king of this island, and everyone had to obey his command. After that day, those creatures never attacked like that again. But every day, a crying sound came from the seashore. David still did not know how much damage they had caused. How many families were broken? How many children lost their people? Only because of a misunderstanding. The next day, David saw some small children of those creatures in the ocean. All of them who had lost their families. David made a round circle of stones, and in the middle of it, he placed that small toy boat, so that Anarius would return. But no matter how long he waited, Anarius never returned. One morning David saw Gruner was lying unconscious. Some old things were kept around him. Among them was an old picture, and as soon as David saw that picture, he was surprised. That girl whose photo he had seen in Gruner's diary on the first day, she was none other than his wife. Gruner had a wife, and he was the weather officer of this lighthouse, who had come to this island approximately 1 year ago. His real name was Robert, but he had changed his name, because now he never wanted to leave this island. Seeing all this, David also gave up hope that he would ever be able to leave this island. The next evening when David went to the seashore, he saw that the small boat kept in that circle was no longer there. But in the same place, he saw a small baby creature holding that boat in its hands. David threw his torch in the middle of that circle so that he could show that his intention was not to fight. He did not want to hurt anyone. He wanted to be friends with them. In a short while, Anarius came out of the ocean waves, and behind her, the entire group of creatures also emerged from the ocean. But this time no one attacked David, because they also wanted peace now. Their intention was only to find a safe place for their children, which every animal does. They absolutely did not like the sudden entry of humans on this island. That's why they attacked every night. But who would explain this to Gruner? He still considers himself the king of this island. Gruner comes out of the lighthouse, holding a gun. David tries to explain to him. These creatures do not want to fight, they want peace. But Gruner does not listen to anyone. He shouts at Anarius, "Go inside." But this was the first time when Anarius did not obey him, because now she was no longer his maid. Now, she was just a mother who was standing up for her children. Gruner starts feeling weak inside, because now no one was obeying his command. In anger, he stepped towards the lighthouse. David thought perhaps Gruner would now understand that every animal wants freedom. No one wants to live as someone's slave. But Gruner was not a sensible person. As soon as he reached the lighthouse, he fired a flare from a signal gun, which directly hit a small creature's baby. That baby died instantly. All the creatures ran away in fear, and Anarius also lost all her trust in David. Mad with anger, David immediately runs towards the lighthouse and collides with Gruner, starts fighting him. Why did you do all this? These people just wanted peace. But Gruner had become so violent that he decided to kill David. Holding an axe, as he was about to strike David, David called him by his real name, Robert. Hearing this, Gruner stopped suddenly. Actually, Robert was never such a person. After coming to this island, his mental state had almost broken. Loneliness, the death of his wife, and deep depression, all these had made him like this. He was actually not a killer. He was a good person. Those creatures never wanted to fight. They just wanted peace. Gruner had killed them only to show himself powerful. And now Gruner had realized his mistake. So he surrendered himself to those creatures. And in a few moments, they killed him. David locks himself inside the lighthouse. Time passes like this. And 1 year later, a government officer comes to the island. Along with him is a new weather officer. David was taken from there. And now the new government officer started monitoring the weather on this island. But that officer thought David was Gruner. And David also did not correct their misunderstanding. He quietly went to the balcony and stood there, without saying anything, because now he also did not want to leave this island, exactly like Gruner. Meanwhile, Anarius was also happy with her family. Now, they had no fear of a man like Gruner. Now they could live freely both on the island and in the ocean.